breast cancer events. I'd be like, oh, that's so sad for them. Like, you know, I was very much in the line of thinking, you know, it's environmental, and it's and the choices that you make, right? And I could do my best to avoid the environmental impacts and the choices that I make on a daily basis by healthy living and conscious living. So when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was just like a huge shock. So basically, I had felt like lumps in my breast, but really like a really big mass. So I always thought like breast cancer would just be these like little pea lumps. And it was like a big mass. And I was actually breastfeeding at the time. I have 2 kids. So my daughter was still breastfeeding, even though she was like quite old, like 4 years old. She was still breastfeeding. So I just thought, okay, well, you know, it's from breastfeeding. It's some sort of like blocked milk duct. And I went into the doctor, and they were like, oh yeah, it's a block, whatever. Don't worry about it right now. Just wait till you're done breastfeeding, and we'll do a mammogram or something. And my mom was actually really persistent with me. She's like, have you gotten a mammogram? Have you gotten a mammogram? And it's interesting because in the US where I live, most women don't get mammograms till they're 45. So I was 39. I'm 40 now. So this is last year, almost a year ago, exactly. And I I was like, okay, this is a little weird. I'm going to stop breastfeeding on that side. So the lump really didn't go away. It felt like it was actually getting bigger. So then I went back again, and I was like, okay, can we like check this out? And so we did a mammogram, which is where they like take your boob, and then they have your boobs, and basically they get compressed and then scanned. It's not that enjoyable of an experience. It is not something that's pleasurable at all, but it needs to be done, right? So it happened, and I'm thinking, okay, it's definitely going to be benign. Like there's no way I could have. It's probably just some cyst. And then I got the news back that actually it was a tumor that they were concerned about, right? And they wanted to do a biopsy. So there was tumors on both sides, not just the right side, and not just the right side, but also the left side. And at that point, they don't tell you have cancer. They just say like that you have some concerning areas, right? So then you have to wait to do a biopsy. And that in the biopsy is when they take samples, and that's where they take a piece of the tissue from the tumor. So that's another process. Once again, not that enjoyable. It's like an ultrasound, and then you just wait. And so a lot of like the whole uncovering of breast cancer is actually a lot of waiting, which is important to have like a deep spiritual grounding, because it could be very anxiety producing. And I know a lot of women struggle with that during the waiting time. So I called on a lot of my foundation, my wellness, my yoga, my, meditation, my, just faith, like, okay, calming, grounding. Because stress, you don't want to be stressed through the process. Like that's the idea. You don't want to be stressed through the process, even though it can be stressful. Right. So then you're waiting. And then I find out that it was actually cancerous, right? So both sides were cancer. So then you're getting that information, and then you have to wait to find out what the diagnosis is, right? Is it stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4? Did it metastasize? Did it go into your body? Is it in your lymph nodes? Like these are all nuances that are very like, oh my gosh, I could die tomorrow. Like you just don't know, right? Is it metastatic, right? So then you have to wait more, and then there's more, uncovering of that. And so mine actually was stage 1 and stage 2. So it actually hadn't metastasized beyond my lymph nodes. And the way that they determined that was I had a surgery where they took out my lymph node. It's called the sentinel node, and they examined it to make sure there was no cancer in that sentinel node. So that's how how I found out. So there was a bit of relief, because once it's gone into your body, that's very, very serious, and requires a lot of action. Not that I didn't have a lot of action as stage 1 and 2, but at that point, your doctor sits down with you and you come up with a plan of action, which involves usually like chemotherapy, things like that. So the next chapter of the story is also genetic testing, right? So there were a lot of red flags because I was under 40. I had bilateral breast cancer, bilateral, which means both sides. And I was really healthy, right? You know, that's a red flag, because most women don't get breast cancer until later on, like in their 60s, you know, especially bilateral. And so I went for genetic testing. And once again, another waiting game, because that takes about 3 weeks to come back. And on the form, you have like these little boxes that you check out, right? Like, are you this? Are you that? Are you this? Are you that? One of the boxes is, are you an Ashkenazi Jew? Well, I am full-blooded Jew, Jewish descent. However, I'm Sephardic and Ashkenazi. And Ashkenazi is the European, Sephardic is the more like Spanish side, because my family was originally from Spain on the Sephardic side. My father's family is the side that my grandmother had breast cancer. My father died of pancreatic cancer. My mother's side is the Ashkenazi didn't. So I thought, all right. But I still, of course, checked Ashkenazi Jew.
What does being a Jew have to do with having breast cancer?
Great question. So the Ashkenazi Jewish population has a higher rate of a certain kind of mutation called the BRCA1, BRCA2. So there's certain mutations because there was a genetic bottleneck during the Inquisition and the Crusades, where a lot of Jews were killed and forced to live in like small ghettoized areas where they intermarried. And the key to genetic diversity is interbreeding. Really, that's like the key to it. That's why if you look at like the Habsburgs, or, you know, like royalty, like the British royalty or something, there's just like a lot of inbreeding, you know, and that causes genetic problems down the line. Not so much now, but back in the day, like people would marry their cousins and stuff like that. So same thing with probably the Jewish population, when there was just a lot of genetic inbreeding. So there's a lot of genetic issues with the Ashkenazi population. So this is one of there are certain markers that Jewish people have for cancer. So anyway, I waited 3 weeks for that. And I think in between that time, we came up with a plan of action for what I was going to do with the situation with the cancer, which involved like heavy chemotherapy, like super blasting chemotherapy, which is challenging for me. I work in holistic health. As I mentioned before, I'm a yoga teacher. I actually used to be a high school teacher, but then I left teaching to do something that I was really passionate about. And that's what led me to work with essential oils and holistic supplements, things like that, that would be more natural than pharmaceuticals, and especially chemical medical drugs. And that's exactly what chemo is. It's literally chemical medicine that's pumped in your body, and it makes you really sick. It makes your hair fall out, and it blasts the chemo. So there's a lot of, that was like a whole journey in itself. And I'm sure women who are listening to this who are like drawn to the holistic world would find it really hard to do chemo, because it literally is just destroying the good and the bad cells, and it makes you really, really sick. Yeah. Whereas like I was even in my own holistic community almost judged sometimes for doing chemo. I remember somebody said, "Oh, that's just gonna kill, like it killed my mom. It's terrible for you," or something like that. And granted, yeah, my father, after he got a shot of chemo, he was no longer able to walk, and then shortly later, like he died. His body couldn't handle the chemo. So I was definitely that was a really hard step. I had another friend who was diagnosed with cancer, not breast cancer, but she ended up going a completely different route, ended up going to Mexico, doing frankincense infusions. And I still have people emailing me, holistic doctors and things like that, which, you know what, I totally understand, because I work in the holistic field. But at the same time, number one, insurance doesn't cover that, and number two, like I do want to go with statistics. And I did have friends who had gone through these kind of chemotherapy, and they're in remission and things like that. So I had an open mind, but it was hard. Like the cancer doctors were really like firm with me about it, and I didn't want to lose my hair. Okay, and I'll touch on that in a second.